What's your future gonna look like? What drives you? What inspires you? How are you gonna make an impact? Well, at Galen University, you can figure that all out.
Hey there, viewers. We are back live today with our Anthropology 101 session. Today, we bring to you another interesting conversation. With us present right now are some dynamic speakers who are graduates from the Galen University of Belize. Today, these anthropologists will elaborate more about their personal achievements and what it is to really graduate with a degree in anthropology. First off, we have Mr. Antonio Berdal. Mr. Antonio Berdal is a Master of Arts graduate student in the archaeology track at Northern Arizona University, working with the very well known Dr. Jaime Awe. Mr. Antonio is also an archaeologist for the Belize Institute of Archaeology. Though born in England, he grew up in western Belize in the town of San Ignacio. He is responsible for creating and providing lectures and exhibits around the country of Belize. And in his 17 years at the Institute, he has reached thousands of Belizeans. Mr. Antonio Berdal, how has your archaeological experience been here in Belize? And what recent projects have you embarked on?
For me, I think it has been very exciting. It's been varied because I've worked across the country at many different sites. I started off as someone who was hauling buckets and ended up to be a supervisor. So now I teach young Belizeans how to dig and why it's important. And that kind of led to where my research is going now, and that is looking at how archaeology can benefit Belizeans, in particular young people. It's all about the interaction that we have with them and how archaeology can go beyond just giving uh, like giving money for tourism, for example. How can people benefit from archaeology? How it can help them to understand their own cultural heritage and their own shared history. So even though it's been 17 years, I can say that it is just the beginning for me because there is a lot more for me to do.
17 years is definitely a lifetime, and it's so interesting that you say it's simply just the beginning. Moving forward, we have Mr. Ismail Taul. Mr. Ismail Taul graduated from Galen back in 2013 with a bachelor's degree in anthropology. He also has a master's degree in environmental science with a specialization in conservation, financing, and a master's degree in science. Mr. Toul has worked 2 years doing several jobs. One, as a research assistant conducting surveys and doing some community research, but he has also worked at the Belize Livestock Producers Association and as a high school teacher, teaching primarily English and social studies. He now works at the Protected Areas Conservation Trust as a monitoring officer. Mr. Toul, can you tell us more about your current work and what has your journey been overall?
Hi, Ismail here. I think that was a pretty comprehensive introduction of what I've done. But currently, I work at FACT as a monitoring officer, and what that primarily is more analytics. So a lot of what I do is to understand how PACT on a whole is spending its money and what returns are we getting in terms of conservation, right? I know, I think I the one anthropologist here who has a very different path of where I started and where I end up in the world of finances, right? So I think what it shares is that you are not only limited by what you've learned, but that there's a lot more to gain from what cultural anthropology has, but anthropology on a whole.
I totally have to agree with you, Mr. Toll. Anthropology has a lot to offer. That is exactly what we'll be doing here today, learning about the many opportunities that we can have in this field. Moving on, Miss Felicia Pelayo. She was born and raised in Roaring Creek Village. Shortly after completing her bachelor's degree in archaeology, she began working at the Institute for Social and Cultural Research. which is a branch of the National Institute of Cultural History. She has been working there for the past 11 years and is currently a senior research and education officer. She holds a master's in archaeology from the University of Reading. At ISCR, she leads the Community Heritage Development Portfolio, which focuses on research, preservation, and building awareness on heritage sites and places of memory. She also assists with ISCR's Living or Intangible Heritage Portfolio and creates educational content. So, Mrs. Felicia Pelayo, would you mind telling us today how has your experience been working over at the Institute for Social and Cultural Research? If you can give us a brief introduction about what it really entails to work there and what it really is.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. First off, I apologize if there is a rooster crowing in my background throughout the session. I'm at home and in Warren Creek, it's just a very, very common. Okay, so as was mentioned, I work at ISCR. I was quite fortunate that right after I completed Galen, there was a vacancy at ISCR 11 years ago. And we're one of the 4 branches of Niche. We're a sister branch to the Institute of Archaeology. We're located in the same building as them in Belmopan. And what we do is that we document a lot of the cultural traditions, the practices, the different forms of heritage in Belize. Living means that we work a lot with people, with communities, with groups across the country. And when working with them, we assist them to really safeguard their heritage, tell their stories. We develop educational resources to try to educate people who might not be from that community or might not be associated with that particular cultural group, understand how diverse Belize's heritage is. Apart from that, under community heritage development, that's a new area for us at Niche and at ISCR. We all know about the archaeological sites in Belize and some of the historic sites, but there's been very little focus on the cultural sites, the heritage sites that are not ancient, but they're still of importance because a particular cultural event or social event or event happened maybe in recent history. And there's also sites where something might have happened, but there's no physical evidence that something took place, but it's part of the memory of a community and for a group. And we work along with communities to find out what the history of those places might be like, how a place might have been before, what role that particular place might have played in a community's history. So a big part of what I do is actually a lot of field work, being out in communities across Belize, talking to people, interviewing a lot of community elders or people who would have that knowledge about the heritage of that community. And apart from that, creating resources that could be used in the classroom, creating resources for our social media platforms, for our websites, to try to educate people in Belize, but also people in the Caribbean and internationally about the history and the cultures of Belize.
Thank you for that explanation, Ms. Palayo. I can tell that you are a very passionate person and what you do is very important.
I believe your mic is muted.
Sorry about that. Last but not least, today we have Ms. Sylvia Bate. Mrs. Sylvia is not only a Galen graduate, but she's also a Chevenin scholar. Besides this, she is an archaeologist and collectionist at the Institute of Archaeology and co-founder of the Heritage Education Network, Belize. Mrs. Sylvia is also the co-author of a trilingual storybook called To the Mountain. To the Mountain promotes archaeological and cultural heritage among children in Belize. Do you mind speaking to us more about Heritage Education Network Belize? And what are some aims and achievements of this nonprofit organization?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction. It's lovely to be here with past Galen graduates. and colleagues in the field. Um, in terms of Heritage Education Network Belize, we are a relatively new NGO. We're just about to celebrate our 1 year anniversary coming up in March. So look out for some activities that will come your way very soon. But yes, the NGO was sort of a spur of the moment decision between myself and four other colleagues who all work in the heritage sector in Belize in different capacities. And it was an immediate response to some of the challenges that we saw that were arising due to COVID and its effects that it has had on the heritage tourism industry in Belize. So we realized very early on that we would not be able to conduct a lot of the community-based collaborative projects that we would each do through our own initiatives and efforts throughout Belize. So myself, Rebecca Friedel, Ella Bekeshi, and April Martinez came together and we decided to pool our efforts through an NGO and move as much of our outreach activities as we could to an online platform. So we are on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and we realized that there was going to be long-lasting effects on the heritage industry. So we focused on business support and archaeological information for people in the heritage industries that were either trying to strengthen their tourism product or to diversify into different areas of you know, diversify their products or into different areas. So we mainly provide business support and try to create connections and visibility for people in the heritage industry, especially those who are, launching new career trajectories. That would be it. And I think our host may have some internet issues.
Did she? Oh, okay. So basically, hearing from all your careers, it looks really, or what you have done. I know most of you, so personally, I can say that you guys are really doing really good with your degrees and have really grown from that. So from that, I applaud every one of you. And I think most of us in the anthropology field right now at Galen, it's our plans to grow as well as students, but to keep learning. So what or how we're going to start with this conversation. From all of you guys, I can hear that you guys are doing really well with with how you have grown as individuals as well as in the degree. But I really want to see or want to hear how, for people who are watching or for students or even those who want to come into the anthropology field, how really do you guys in your careers, how do you think anthropology is really important in your careers? In your different fields, has the knowledge that you have gained through anthropology assisted you?
Okay, shall I jump in? For me, archaeology has always been, in my eyes, when I first started, it was always just about the hard evidence and what is there. It's what you excavate, it's what you interpret from that. I didn't actually take a class in anthropology until I was about to come here. And it kind of opened up my eyes. And then in coming here, in taking different courses in anthropology, it has allowed me to be able to see other points of view and to understand that there are many ways to interpret the same thing. It all depends on who's doing the interpretation. So some people might want to look at hard evidence. Some people might want to look at cultural interpretations. Some people might want to look at oral histories of a given place. And as archaeologists, we have to not dismiss anything that we might see as not being scientific, but instead, all of these different interpretations can lend strength to a better story of something. For example, when Fel was talking about these places of history, places that people remember, these are important. So we might see a landscape and say, it's just a landscape. Other people might say this is an important landscape because this and this and this happened here. Another group might say this is important to us because this is where our people emerged. So all these different interpretations coming together can make for a really good story about what that place is. So anthropology can help you see that there are always different points of view in in basically anything that you do.
That was
I
such a
totally
great.
agree with
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I totally agree with what Tony has been saying that for me, anthropology, I get started with my curiosity about human behavior and telling the human story. And although my academic training has been in archaeology, a lot of the skills that I picked up have actually become pretty relevant in the field that I work with. One of the things in the work that I do is that we really try to tell the stories of communities, of groups from their point of view, have them become their own voices. And I think that's very much important and maybe even a little bit different than when I was in school and at least my own idea of what anthropology was like. Back then, for me, it was more going in as a researcher or an observer and writing that narrative about what I saw and experienced from more my point of view, even if you interviewed somebody. Now we see that transition where communities and groups are taking ownership of their own narratives. And so you see that change happening in anthropology nowadays. And it's actually been pretty exciting to be a part of that.
I think following up on what Felicia said, that action of community ownership and their role in creating that narrative has really formulated the goals for Heritage Education Network Belize. And even before that, with our previous NGO, Fahina Archaeology Outreach, um, Heritage Education Network Belize is a merger of an archaeology-based NGO and a sustainable travel company. So we're approaching that idea of community ownership and empowerment from the business perspective, but also from the archaeology perspective. And like Felicia mentioned, we're seeing as archaeologists our roles expand to more that of heritage managers, and instead of being the decision makers, rather creating spaces for collaborative projects to occur. So our roles are now connectors rather than being the ones who are decision makers, and it's very organic, the relationships that develop, and it's very rewarding to sort of to see those deep connections occur, and that ownership to occur in a lot of these projects that we're seeing. And like Phil mentioned, it's really exciting. It's being on the forefront of that change.
Thank you for that. Now I have a question for Mr. Teul. Do you happen to have any advice for those wanting to study anthropology, or simply for those who have recently graduated?
Advice. Well, I think that one of the main worries as anybody graduating from school, doesn't matter what level, whether a bachelor's, a master's, or a PhD. I think the immediate question after that is what is it you're going to do? And really, it comes from part of doing what you like, but as well taking advantage of what is available, right? Back when you had introduced me, you guys would notice that I did piece of everything in a sense, right? That I moved from one place to another. However, through that experience, it's not what you know necessarily, it's how you know how to apply it, if that makes sense, right? So what anthropology on a whole offers is a bit of a bit of everything. You get a bit of economics, right? You get a bit of creative writing, as Felicia had mentioned earlier, that it's from her point of view that she is going to express what she see through words, right? And those type of individuals I always admire, because for me that is something I cannot do, right? I cannot do it very easily. Even back when I first started anthropology, but you would find that when you sit in these courses and they give you articles to read, that they weren't very hard to read, right? That you could get over a 20-page article relatively easy because the writing is so engaging. The story that they're telling, they format it in a story as opposed to an academic style of writing. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because those became very powerful when I started to work. Right. So before then, I really never really knew what to do when I graduated, because it's not like someone is advertising for an anthropologist, right? And when you start working and start picking up these jobs, you would find that a lot of the skills that I had picked up while in school was something that I applied fairly easily. Now, the point here being, coming back to what I said, is how you apply what you know, right? So one of the most important things about school in any discipline is learning how to learn. And I think that's the first thing you need to work at, right? How is it that you learn? How can you motivate yourself to focus on a task for maybe 2 hours and get the homework done, or something like that, right? Or how does your environment affect the way you think? So that's the first thing that we need to work on. And the second thing now is the niche skills that you learned. So for me, one of the things that I've learned was talking, verbally communicating, right? A lot of compliments that I get was more along the lines that I could express myself in a way where both people could understand. And that became very, very helpful, not in the presentation that I did, but also in teaching, right? That you just, that when you're talking to students, it's not about rattling off all the technicalities that you know, but rather bringing it to their level so they understand. Oh, now I know why 1 plus 1 is 2, as opposed to forcing them to remember that 1 plus 1 is 2. And that is something powerful. And I think that is something that anthropology has to offer each one of us. Because now when you come in the world of communications, the idea is not to say what you know, but rather the other person to understand what it is you're saying. And that in and of itself is so powerful, because that's what everybody is looking for at the end of the day, right? It doesn't matter whether you're in the financing sector, whether you're in the tourism, or even the academic discourses, that you will find that that is the basic, and you build on top of that. So to your question, the advice is, number one, learn or figure out how you learn, and then number two is figure out how to apply what you know in the end, right? Yeah, so that's my advice.
So right there where you're going with that, I agree with you. I think anthropology is really important, and I think it can be applied on various aspects in our lives, on how we understand things, on how we understand individuals, on how individuals understand us. So I think it's really important in every aspect. But I want to ask a question here. Do you guys think that, because the first time that I was taught anthropology was in sixth form, my last year. That was the first time I was ever taught the subject of what anthropology is. Do you think anthropology as a subject should be taught in as early as high school? Do you think that anthropology as a subject should be taught in early stages of school? What do you guys think? Knowing the benefits of anthropology, what do you guys think of as individuals who have gone on and really can grow from anthropology?
I'm gonna say that I think you stole that question from my own interviews that I did over the summer. Um, having spoken to a bunch of young people over the summer for my research, that's one of the questions I asked. Um, And everyone said yes. However, a couple of teachers I spoke to said that there might be some resistance to teaching anthropology as early as high school because that means having a cultural shift. And if you take schools that are run by churches, for example, they might not want to have differing points of view coming in. But I think anthropology as early as high school could be of great benefit because it forces you, in a sense, to open your mind and to think outside of the box that you grew up in and to understand that there are diverse cultures around the world. And it helps you to put on the cap of an anthropologist in how you view these cultures. So you don't just look at a culture and you criticize, but you put on this new hat and you analyze what's going on and you analyze it from an anthropological point of view. So that's what it does. By the time you get to junior college or university, your mind is already kind of made up in terms of what you think and how you view the world. High school is a very formative time. So this would be a great time for young people to be introduced to many different schools of thought. And then this can eventually lead them to, I want to do this in the future. Let me really pursue this in junior college. Or I absolutely hate it and I don't want to go that way. I'll go do math or something.
Right, and coming to your point on what Antonio, and building on what Antonio is saying, it would be great, number one, for the writing, right? A lot of us, while yes, we've been introduced to Caribbean literature, and I think one Belizean book, I think what we miss a lot is understanding how we could apply our own perspectives in not only English but other forms of art, right? And the reason I say that is because for me, what has always been my biggest weakness was writing and expressing myself on paper. And I overcame that through anthropology, where a lot of it is writing, right? But you get this idea, or you get this perspective that you are really free to create your own world. And coming from high school, where a lot of what you read were more the technical textbooks and things like that, where you had to express yourself in a boring passive tense type of writing, you could actually make it a lot more engaging when you see these other examples out there, right? That it doesn't have to be these cold text whenever you're trying to express yourself. So for me, that there was something powerful, and learning to do that in high school and learning to get these different perspectives, I think is something key into not only appreciating what anthropology has, but to also express your ideas, right? That you've seen how Belizean literature has grown over time, right? There is no longer the Edgel, and it has exploded to an entire work of literature by Belizeans. And being exposed to that, I think, is something that would be beneficial, and of course to our history as well, no? So yeah, I would definitely go for that. But there are the drawbacks, as Antonio had mentioned, that there are people who would tell you, no, you don't. And changing within high school especially is something very hard to do, as you are mandated to execute the curriculum, right? I mean, curriculum change and curriculum development is a whole another issue on its own. But back to the question, yeah, I would agree that it should be something done in high school.
Um, to add to what both of what Antonio and Ishmael were saying, I am a supporter of STEM, and I am a supporter of including archaeology within the curriculum. And to expand that to anthropology, I think what we should be seeing in the high school level for sure, and definitely as early as the primary school level is the inclusion of sciences. And it would require us to pivot and to sort of view anthropology and archaeology as what they truly are, one of the branches of science. And I'm a proponent of that change, but also what I would like to see is the inclusion of not only um, anthropological classes, but the study of anthropology as a science and what that can provide to the wider Belizean society. I think there are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to how we view culture, how we view ethnicity, how we view some of these discourses, and we often hear the ideas of I don't think that is correct or I don't believe that is true. Well, there are scientific ways to measure sort of the way that we process a lot of these ideas as a society and as individuals. There are factual scientific processes that lead us to archaeological to our decisions as archaeologists, and I think including that scientific process in the educational system will go far to create visibility for anthropology, to create a sense of understanding, but also to allow us to see and to engage with these concepts from a scientific perspective, because at the end of the day, it's not sort of a matter of how we feel about things, is how can we empirically look at things without bias and draw conclusions from that. So I think that would make it very important and very applicable in the school system. And it might not have to be an anthropology class, it might just be merging existing aspects of anthropology within the curriculum that already makes provisions for the inclusion of sciences.
Yeah, and I agree with you guys fully. I did not steal the question, but it's just something that I always think about because from the anthropology club, we know how greatly anthropology has assisted us. Personally, it has assisted me, and honestly, I wish I took it in high school. I think it would have assisted my class, schools, society. It would have helped us understand and maybe even diminish some problems that were occurring. But it can really explain and it brings understanding to a situation. So it's so important. Um, I know that from our last live that we had with Culture Heritage, I think we had a live with Mr. Tool. Um, and I remember that you worked at PAC. One of the things that we want to talk on, and it's spoken about widely in the anthropology club here at Galen, but we really want to know, since at the start, I remember you were mentioning about the importance of a community when you're talking about anthropology and even within that organization, even within PACT. So how really do you think that the community, what's really the importance of working with the community?
All right. Let me see if I could be as concise as possible because now you've opened a Pandora's box of where I could add a lot, right? But I think one thing that we have to learn is that idea especially, and not just any idea, but ideas in a whole evolve over time, right? PACT in its name is Protected Areas Conservation Trust, and what it is an organization that really funds NGOs that manages protected areas, right? And that's at the core of its work. And back when it was established in 1996, that really was legislated on the law that it should finance protected areas. Over time, though, we found that that was a limiting idea in the sense that protected areas is not something in isolation. What it is, it's the economy of Belize on a whole, right? And it's people that interact. And if you want support for these particular areas, you have to show the benefits of why is it that we're preserving all the trees, right? You know, a lot of the rhetoric around protected areas are at least the negative ones. So we realized then that is a limiting idea, and what we have to do now is that we need to take community into consideration. But there is the danger that when you deal with communities that you might negatively impact them as well. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the work of Paige West. She's a cultural anthropologist as well, and she did a lot of work in Asia where she documented that um, a lot of these guys or a lot of these NGOs come in with conservation efforts in mind. That one of the more popular ways of helping Buffer communities is through the tourism markets. The problem with that, though, is that the business world had exploited that, right? Because these guys they work for next to nothing, right? As we see not only here in Belize but globally. If you want something cheap, you go to the indigenous people that would kind of get you the label of a cheap price. And so that was one of the things that she had really publicized to the world that, in an effort to try doing good, we've ended up doing something bad. We've changed culture and we've introduced a lot of these problems that were never there to begin with. So that was a cultural change, or that was a change really in the world of financing, right? And now we've introduced this whole new system called environmental social management frameworks, right? And it's something developed underneath the World Bank, and almost everybody who does grant management or financing of these things, they have to consider that. And in Belize, if you haven't heard that, no, it is something you will begin to hear because almost everybody has to do that now. With the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, all of these big players in the games are now implementing those things, right? And Belize, we rely a lot on grants. It shocked me to realize how much we actually rely on grant donation to kind of get some of these bigger projects implemented. And and the reason I'm saying that is because that is how anthropologists, rarely even the cultural as archaeologists, now we need specialized skills, right? When we were first introduced to this environmental social management framework, really truly nobody knew what it was, or nobody knew how to implement it, right? And you had questions where you had to say, all right, if we are going to invest X amount of dollars in these communities to better them, the idea being better them, how are you going to measure that? How is it that we know that we're not going to negatively impact that community, right? And that is where realizing how cultures are so important to uh, get these positive outcomes as opposed to the negative ones. Now, earlier, you guys had mentioned that I worked as a research assistant, and that is true. And I went in those communities and I observed how is it that the Maya people organize themselves, how the geopolitical landscape, if you will, of understanding these complex ideas. While many of us as students might go in there and see our one perspective, the reality, as Sylvia has mentioned, there are empirical observations to be made as well. And that was very important when I came here to PAC, as PAC is somewhere that is a place filled with all environmentalists, as you would see, right? People with degrees in chemistry, biology, drones, GIS, and all of these things, but not a cultural anthropologist or not someone with that social background. And that's where I became very valuable here because of the experience that I had in anthropology, right? So I was able to know, or I was able to say, all right, you know what? Yeah, these are some of the risks that could come from these projects, but you're missing this, right? You're missing that, or you're missing how is it that the alcalde system and the chairman system kind of fight with each other, right? The conflicts that exist between the oil development, communal land rights. It's not that everybody wants communal land rights. That's kind of the general idea out there, but the reality is that is not the case, right? So it's all of these things that you learn. and then you apply it to your project. Okay, if we want something very beneficial, we have to take these variables into consideration because more than likely, PAC will get in trouble if we try to side with one person, right? And yeah, that's not what we want at the end of the day. So those things are very important, and I think that's how I became very valuable here at PAC because of the niche knowledge that I have, and this is why I say it's very important to learn how to apply what you know, right? It's not just filling your head with knowledge; it's really using it at the end of the day, right? So yeah, that really is the goal there. But being exposed here, not only am I exposed to that cultural part, but the financing world as well. I mean, you need to know how to talk to these bankers in their lingo as well. So it's kind of being introduced to this whole new realm of economics of how the banking system works. How do you measure return on investments? These more core metrics that are part of the financing world, right? And comes back to one of my advice where I say you have to know how to learn, or you have to figure out how you as a person learn to be able to keep up with these shifting ideas that come up, no? Yeah, so yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it actually does though, because we in the Anthropology Club, we try to do a lot of outreaches. Um, like for Anthropology Day, we would try to get outside, but COVID has really affected us in that area. Um, we have plans, but COVID really stopped a lot. So in the Anthropology Club, we have a specific section, um, the Environmental Club as well, and we came up with these bags, these Go Green bags. It was designed by our Anthropology Club, by our Environmental Club. One of the individuals in that club did the art design. Um, that the little bag, they did the art design. They came up with it. Another person, they digitally drew it, and we composed this bag. And it was from we got help from the Pan American Development Foundation to do really an outreach, to want to do an outreach. We just wanted to ask for advice because I know there are other clubs or small groups outside that really want to do their own outreaches when it comes to any Go Green projects, to comes to any community outreaches. What would be your advice? Any one of you can answer, obviously, but what would be your advice when it comes to trying to reach the community with any kind of ideas? Well, one such like this.
I guess I could comment on that a bit, because a lot of the work that we do is very much community based. The first thing I would say is look at your own circle of friends that you have and the communities that they come from. For our projects, in order for any of them to be successful, they always require community buy-in. And one of the best ways to get that is to have a person from within that community that you already have a relationship with, or that you can create a relationship with, to sort of introduce you to the other persons in that community. It's a lot more difficult to go in as a group or as an organization and as a newcomer, compared to going in with somebody who's from that community or has a tie somehow to that community. So I would say definitely, if you're able to reach out to some other network, such as Heritage Education Network as well, that has a very wide network across the country, that would also help. So definitely partnering with people who either have a similar cause to yourself, or people that already have that reach within the community or the area that you would like to have a presence in would help.
I'd like to jump in as well. Like Felicia mentioned, a lot of the work is creating that as working with an established network or creating that network is very important to establish those types of communication. And I would suggest that as heritage managers, you place a focus on creating ownership. At the end of the day, you're going to create value when people are invested in these projects because they have had some level of input in that project. And I think that is one of the areas where anthropologists and archaeologists can definitely improve. We often sort of come from a platform of knowledge and a place of experience. So we have all of this information that we want to share and we want to put out there. But I will say, speaking from personal experiences, anthropologists and sometimes archaeologists, or oftentimes archaeologists, don't have the best PR. We are not as good at communicating as we should be. We are researchers, and a lot of times when we write very technically. So our forte is not getting in front of a camera or being in the communities and sort of participating and creating those actions. So I would say know your community, create connections with those communities. Don't think you have a blanket sort of recipe for what will work for everyone. Every community is unique, so you have to approach every community with a unique approach, a unique perspective, and without any biases. And I would also say sort of just be open with your communication. So if this is an idea, sort of put it out there and get feedback as soon as you can and take those feedbacks into consideration. Like it might not, your project will change and it might not be sort of what you envisioned it, but what you envision might not be what the community feels that they need. And it took me about 3 or 4 years of doing community-based projects to say, you know what, at the end of the day, I didn't ask. I've just been putting out this information, and even if that information is useful, it doesn't have that representation or that community voice in there. And I would also say start off very, very basic. So a lot of times, even if it's like the bag that you have that you've sort of designed, go very basic. For us, that we've sort of been immersed in a field, we might want to explain so many technical things. And sometimes people just want something very, very simple, very, very basic, very easy to digest, easy to look at. And that's where diversifying, as Ishmael has said, comes in. Know your skills, diversify your skills. So that would be more from a marketing perspective. Do something very, very small rather than something technical. And yeah, engage people, talk to people, I would say.
Yeah, I mean that is what Sylvia has brought up is something very important because even we as well know the importance of community engagement. We have the more technical term called stakeholder engagement, where we really do need the community's feedback if we want a positive outcome from our programs that we put in, right? From the money that we put in. I mean, you get nervous if you give someone $100,000 and the community really didn't want the project, right? That really gets you nervous. So that in a sense has to be one of the biggest approach that you do it. For us, it's the first step on the to-do list is to really go into the communities and find out if this is what we want, what their perspectives are on it, right? It takes a getting used to, or it takes a special person to kind of weed out some of the feedback that you get to really get to what exactly it is you want. And I think something like that just comes from experience, right? As you know, people will tell you, we've been doing this for years now, and it's still very hard to pinpoint what it is that they actually want. But it's something that comes with experience, right? So, yeah, it was just to build on what Sylvia had said.
Now we will move on and take a question from our audience. How much pushback do you think that you would get if you introduced anthropology with a secular approach instead of under the mantle of creationism? And this is forwarded to Miss Sylvia.
Thank you, Marissa. Even though it's forwarded to me, I believe if anyone else on the panel sort of wants to jump in, they can as well. I would say that there is going to be pushback at some degree or the next, but I am hopeful in the sense that the new Belizean studies curriculum, for example, does include human evolution. It does sort of include a secular approach to the study of how we are here as human beings. So the steps that we are taking in in that direction makes me hopeful that there will be an opportunity for sort of these types of discourse in the school system. And I think what anthropology can also teach us or inform us when it comes to these types of questions is that the idea is to listen to everybody's perspective and to create equity rather than equality, and that it is okay to listen to somebody else's perspective and to respect their opinions, their beliefs, even if it doesn't align with yours. And those discourses can be had if you take that approach of anthropology from a scientific perspective, and you sort of frame those conversations along those lines. So I'm hopeful that's the type of discourse that is being generated through the new belief studies curriculum, that we can speak about human evolution and creationism from an unbiased perspective. And at the end of the day, if we cannot both agree on one over the other, then we can agree to, in all senses, agree to disagree, but from a place of mutual respect. So I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that.
Alrighty, thank you for that answer, Miss Sylvia. Now
Welcome.
moving on with the following question, and I believe you can answer this question, or I guess this would be forwarded to Miss Pelayo.
Okay, so the question was really, since I know Miss Sylvia and Miss Patty and Miss Palau, you guys work in the heritage area. I'm a huge fan, by the way, but I know that you guys work there, and I'm a huge fan of the Fahina outreach. How have you guys, since as the start of this conversation, it was community, the importance of a community when it comes to anthropology and when it comes to outreaches. I know that the Heritage Network, the community is an important aspect of the outreaches that you guys hold. I'm a big fan of all of the outreaches, but I know it plays a huge role in anthropology and as well as the organization that you guys have. How personally, you guys and anybody in this conversation, but how much do you guys think the importance of outreaches, of awareness, of education, of the different outlets that you guys have are important when it comes to anthropology and when it comes to really a community? What do you guys think is the importance of all these outreaches?
Phil, do you mind taking that from an ISCR perspective first?
Yes, sure. So a pillar of our work is actually public education and community outreach. Everything that we do, that's always the end result, to build awareness about Belize's cultural heritage. This has taken different forms over the years. We do this through publications, we do this through our social media platforms, we do this through our websites. We do this in person when we're out in communities. Some of the issues that has been mentioned throughout this discussion, I think would definitely be resolved by having more public education and awareness across the country. I know that there's been instances where we've been in a particular community and you see that a tradition is dying out or a practice is dying out. And when you ask what the reason might be, people will say, my daughter or my children aren't interested, or they joined a particular religious denomination and they're not able to practice this tradition anymore. It's definitely very hard to hear when you go in and you see something and you know the value of it and you want it to be protected and to safeguard and for it to last. I've also been in instances where in school settings actually where we're teaching about a tradition such as finados, for example, and somebody see a picture and they see a picture of a skull or something like that, and they think, okay, that's devilish. That shouldn't be taught in the classroom. And one way to address that is by educating people at different levels, educating teachers, educating children, educating parents, educating people who might not be from a particular group that practices that tradition. So awareness building is definitely something that we need more of, that we need across different sectors, and that we need different groups to be doing. And a part of that, I think, also comes back to the role that young people can play when they're in high school, but maybe even younger. I think by learning about anthropology, you're able to learn about yourself as well, and your own identity, and about your family, and about your community. And high school, for example, is a tough time for some students, depending on the area that you might come from, or the background that you might come from. And when we go in there and we show them, okay, this is a tradition that was practiced and how it's important it is, and it might be something that they're familiar with, you really see that sense of pride that they have within themselves. So that's another important reason why there should be more public education and awareness across the country. What we do is that we promote, we safeguard cultural heritage for the younger generations. So I think young people definitely have a role to play as well when it comes to building awareness.
Thank you. Thank you for situating all of that, Phil. And I think sort of your contribution, well, not your as in the sense of ISCR, the Institute for Social and Cultural Research's contribution toward community building is extremely important. And it sort of underlines the principles of Nietzsche's contribution to the cultural heritage sector, and it's definitely things that we have worked on. Antonio can attest to this in the research and education department at the Institute of Archaeology. In terms of my own NGO work, I feel like our role is that of support. So we acknowledge that niche isn't going to be able to do everything. The government of Belize can't manage all aspects of culture, and by all regards, they shouldn't really. Culture is fluid, it's dynamic, and as we have seen through these discussions, it's a collaborative process. And what we have tried to do both under FAHINA, Archaeology Outreach, and under Heritage Education Network Belize is to create connections, to create areas where that collaborative approach to heritage management can occur, to provide support to ISCR and to the Institute of Archaeology's sort of overall goals, because we realize that in the heritage sector there are a lot of people who are, understaffed and overworked, and with a little bit of collaboration and organization through these NGOs, we are able to support their mandates indirectly, but also to provide a voice for communities in which they can be they can have authority and be the authors of their own lived experiences with heritage. And our support goes beyond niche initiatives, but areas that we could improve in would be, engaging PACT, engaging the school system, engaging the houses of culture, and other areas that really and truly directly affect the preservation of culture in these communities. With our children's book, for example, that was co-authored through Fahina, it was really a community effort. So it spoke about archaeology, it spoke to literacy, it spoke to environmental conservation. The book was made by Belizeans for Belizeans. It was crowdfunded, published and distributed by Belizeans. And I think when you look at sort of that project and you really do sort of a post-mortem assessment of it, one of the major areas in which we failed is because we gave that to the community and the community participated in the creation of it, but the community never asked for it. So people from Sukkot Sever said, we would like a children's book, and it was just something that we thought would be good for the community. And I think from an informed position and from sort of a place where we wanted to do good, it was a successful project. But I would say, even as an NGO that was run by archaeologists and heritage practitioners, in the blandest regard, we failed in that respect. So a lot of it is sort of doing self-reflections and realizing that while you might have the best interests of communities at heart, at the end of the day, participatory action is extremely important, and all we can do is continue to improve and acknowledge the areas where we could have done better, and continue to support communities at the end of the day, because the reason why we do it is ethical, and it's because we want to create equity. I think all of us are very invested in supporting people, and for those reasons it's important.
Hmm. Hello. Now I've known Tony and Sil for a good while now, and I can honestly say that you two are my greatest inspirations. And I know Tony's studying public archaeology, and I know Miss Sil is very involved with public archaeology as well. So I want to ask the both of you, what is the importance of public archaeology? Then I want to ask a more general question. Should the wider community be more involved with archaeology and anthropology?
Well, um, everything that Sil just said is the reason why public archaeology is important. And before I go any further, I want to give a shout out to my friends watching this in New York and Texas. Hello. Um, it has been happening in Belize for a long time. It's just a lot of people did not know, or it has never been studied. It was never written about. There have been some projects working in Belize that have a very public component. They work with the public, whether it's giving lectures or giving tours or having local people come to work and learn on their projects. But no one really wrote anything about it. And at the Belize Archaeology Symposium, the papers generally are about the academic findings of what's going on. So something like public archaeology tends to be ignored. But the work that we do at the Institute of Archaeology, going to the schools, going into the public, having fairs, all of these things, that's public archaeology. And it's very heavily intertwined with cultural heritage and cultural heritage management. So, in essence, public archaeology exists because archaeology exists and because the public exists. And so we basically have to marry the two. It's important because people, when you ask people why is archaeology important, a lot of people will say, oh, because the sites are open and there's tourism, so there's money. That's great. That's also a form of public archaeology, but there has to be more. What do the people learn from archaeology? How is archaeology benefiting the history of Belize? How is it benefiting cultural heritage and our shared Belizean identity? This is why public archaeology is important. And there's a lot of ignorance and misconceptions that still exist in Belize. For example, that archaeologists are in the country looting artifacts and taking everything out, that the jade head is not real, that the crystal skull is a real artifact. All of these things are reasons why public archaeology and education and outreach is important. I think it's a component that us at the Institute of Archaeology, I think, may need to invest more time and more attention in what we do and in how we execute it. Sylvia very rightly said that if we don't give the community what they ask for, then maybe they won't have the interest. And when I was talking to the guys from the IA over the summer, they mentioned this guy that came in who found some artifacts. He's a farmer. And when speaking to him about Maya farming techniques, he was very interested. But you shift into something else, then you might lose his interest completely, and then you lose the entire message. So public archaeology is also understanding what the public needs, what the public wants, and what is possible in terms of the resources that you have. So I hope that kind of covered stuff, and I know Sil is going to jump in with something brilliant as well.
I think you covered it well enough, Tony. Yeah, public archaeology is sort of like you said, a marrying or a merger of the two. I sort of see it, the more you study it, I think I sort of see it as a public archaeologist being both an archaeologist and an anthropologist. It is applying anthropology to archaeology, and sort of expanding the field to create better connections with the public, and the public in the sense of anyone who is who interacts with archaeology. So a group of archaeologists can be considered as a public who engage in archaeology in a certain way. So um, yeah, it's it collaborations with communities are opening up the field of archaeology to be more inclusive is extremely important for the simple reason that we are all sentient beings and we all have a right to knowledge. And that would be derived from sort of the University College London views on public archaeology, but it is a simple intrinsic right for a human being to have access to knowledge, and that is the reason why we engage in public archaeology. And I think Tony would agree with me on that one as well.
Um, I have a question. How did you get interested in archaeology? What was your spark? What really and truly, um, what really and truly set you on the path to this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life? And also, what do you research about you personally and why? I think that would be interesting.
Um, I landed in archaeology by accident. I needed a job. The tourism development project was around, and I needed to make some money. So I started work as a shovel bum. I was moving buckets of dirt and rocks and mixing cement. So when you go to Caracol, Calpech, Shenantonich, my blood, sweat, and tears went into the consolidation of many structures. But then along the way, I really got interested in the science behind it, and I used to ask questions. And I think that's probably what caught Dr. Awe's eye. So one day he asked me, "Do you know how to use a computer?" And I gave him this the kind of look. And so he moved me from the field to work in the lab. And part of my responsibility was to retype his master's thesis, which was 500 pages long. Um, but I was learning the lingo. And when the project ended, he said, "We'll bring you in to the institute as a research assistant." I got into it. They threw me into research and education. I studied how everyone else gave lectures. And I started off very rocky, but eventually I found my footing and realized that giving lectures, going into schools, interacting with people, that's the favorite part of my job. I mean, I excavate and I teach field methods, and I love that part. I don't care about the about finding ceramics and architecture. It's important, but my joy comes from seeing the young Belizean digging and them making their interpretations and asking the questions and writing the tags and learning, or going into the schools and seeing the spark in the eyes of kids when you talk about the Maya history and how they used to change the shape of their heads, and they're listening. And when they come to you afterwards, as sometimes they do, and say, "I remember you. You gave a lecture at my school. You inspired me. You got me into wanting to know more about my history, about my people, and got me into archaeology." So when I came to do my master's, I could have relied on the excavations that I did at Cajalpech for years, but I decided I was going to do something that I'm passionate about, and that's my interaction and working with the public. So finding out how the work we do impacts the public. What works? Why does it work? Where are we limited? What doesn't work and why has it failed? And to publish this in a way that anyone coming to Belize doing archaeology can read this and be like, huh, I did not think about that. Because people have done research on public archaeology and outreach and public perceptions on archaeology before in Belize is not new, but it's largely done from the point of view of foreigners. And what they might not understand is the very nuanced, way of behavior of Belizean culture. And if you don't understand, you know, the inner linings of Belizean culture, you can't really interpret the answers very well, and you don't know exactly what the answers are. So my research is looking at what works. How does cultural heritage management function, and what are the necessary steps that we need to do to make it even better?
Miss Sil, what was your spark?
Um, I prefer not to talk about my spark, but rather the reasons why I stayed. And in my case, I remain in the field of archaeology because there are not enough people doing it. As much as I sort of love archaeology, love being in the field, love that aspect of discovery, the most fulfilling aspects of archaeology for me has been public archaeology and that aspect of community engagement and sort of working to create better futures for everyone in their engagement with archaeology. And I think we have such a need for archaeologists, we have such a need for heritage managers, we have such a need for community-based um, and community-led projects in archaeology. And I think there is also a need to create jobs in those fields. And I think heritage well, students of anthropology also need to create their own niches and their own avenues to better engage in heritage. And I'd like to see more collections managers, more people in museum management, more people involving archaeology and anthropology in the everyday aspects of their lives and in multiple aspects of their jobs, whether it's directly in the field or indirectly in ways that Ishmael engages. And my contribution and the reason why I say is to create those opportunities and to pave the road for the next generation of heritage managers in our country. Fel, what are your reasons?
I think some of my reasons are some of the same that you shared, but I'll actually share my origin story because I think that might be a little bit more interesting for people. So my spark actually began with Egyptology when I was in high school, and then it was my mother that suggested that I try to get some archaeology experience. So I started off doing the field schools when I was right out of high school, and I had that experience that many of us had when we found our first pottery sherd, the excitement. And I did it for a couple more years, and then I enrolled in Galen's anthropology program. And I initially wanted to be an archaeologist, and that was something that even after I started working at ISCR and in more cultural anthropology, that I still wanted to do. So I studied archaeology in the UK and focused a bit more on osteoarchaeology because I always had this fascination with dead people. And in terms of my interest in archaeology, it was always what the skeletons could tell us. But I still am at ISCR, and the work that I do is different. But as we've seen from this discussion, it's very much interrelated, the different sectors of anthropology. So for me, why I've continued to work in this area and why I'd like to continue to work more in the cultural anthropology field definitely has to do with some of the rewards and the connections that you make with people doing this type of job. I've made a lot of long lasting connections with people from across the country. And I've seen so much of my country over the past 11 years that I probably would have never seen on my own. I've met a lot of wonderful people and passionate people about their culture and about their heritage. And it's always very inspiring. And doing this for a long time, I know that if I'm ever stranded in some particular community, there's probably somebody I could call who could call somebody. That's the type of relationships that you build working in the field of anthropology for so long. So that's probably the most rewarding for me.
Now, Miss Felicia, um, you work in cultural heritage. Now, what role do you think young people can play in the preservation and safeguard of cultural heritage?
I think there's various roles that young people could play. Um, One, just off the top of my head, and I think especially now, has to do with how a lot of people younger than myself are very technologically savvy. And I think when we're talking about building awareness and expanding our reach, young people they have a better handle. You're the young people in front of me. You have a better handle on how to use some of these platforms, to use the different apps, and you come with a lot of strong networks now than when I first started off in the field. And we've seen the importance of transitioning to more virtual spaces and digital platforms because of COVID, and you've seen the how TikTok has evolved in Belize. We see a lot of young people out there sharing their culture by recording videos, by putting out content on their social media, and that's definitely a resource and a network that we would want to tap into in order to expand the work that we do. And we've actually done this a bit over the years. We have a network of persons across the country. They're cultural activists, promoters, practitioners who we've worked with and we've trained to document the heritage in their community. Because at ISCR, we're a very, very small staff with limited resources. And a branch of that network that was formed recently was actually a sub network of young people, very much like yourselves from across the country, who using their smartphones document their heritage. They interview their community elders or their parents. So there's that active role that young people can play. I think also continuing with some of the skills that they have and some of the jobs that Sylvia mentioned, there's a lot that could be done in the field of anthropology in terms of jobs. I think this is something that might not always be so well known when you're in the classroom and you're studying the subjects, but there is a need for that diversity of skills in heritage management. So people that come in with design, the good writers are able to work in helping us to expand our reach and develop materials. I, for example, when I started, I thought I was going to be mainly writing research papers. And a few months after I started, my boss was, okay, I need you to design a flyer for one of our events. I had never learned to use any design program, so I had to teach myself on the spot. And what that has led to over the years is actually now being in charge of designing and developing the print materials, the online materials. And I think young people now come with that skill set from a much younger age than some of us. So there is that part. And I also think that by having young people involved in anthropology and in safeguarding heritage, it very much helps them to learn about themselves. You learn about your history, the history of your community. You have a better understanding of why certain things are a part of the traditions in your family or your community. And there's also that sense of validation that young people can give to the elders in their community that they're working with. A lot of times when we're in communities, we hear that the younger generation, they don't have an interest in a particular practice or tradition. So that particular practice or tradition is dying out. By having young people do the interviews, take the photos, do the recordings, they actually learn to see the value of some of these traditions and practices. So it's there's definitely a role for young people to play.
Okay, there is just one more question for Mr. Ismail. Um, what inspired you to work in PACT, in general?
Sorry, could you repeat that again? What inspired me?
What made you work in PACT?
Oh, I think it's just like anybody else, where I was just looking for a job, and really that was it. It was just a vacancy that came out, and yeah, I applied for it. I got the job, and then I came in, started the position. It was originally a position of data analytics, and math has always been something that I've been good at ever since, as far as I could remember. So I never run away from it, and statistics was part of my thesis that I did when I did my master's. So when I saw that the requirement was a degree in statistics, I applied for it. I got it. Even though originally I was hired on to do that, I mean, really, my anthropology degree came in very useful, right? And I think that's what made them keep me on board as for the past 3 years. Um, but yeah, it was just that. It wasn't really an inspiration or anything. It was just looking for a job. But the more you do it, the more that you engage with community, and you see that at the desk that you sit, some of the more important work that Belize as a country has left to do is amazing, right? And it's not that there is a lack of job opportunities, I would say, because there's so much. I mean, from the test that I see, there's so much skills that we need in the country, but I guess it's more how we advertise it, right? How do we try to expose them? Because as part, I mean, the number of consultants that we hire on a per year basis is amazing, right? But yet we rarely get tenderings, or what we call bids, from our our Belize people. Rather, most of them is international, right? And we know Belizeans have the skills to do these things, but I think one of the things that we really lack is more of the is getting used to bureaucracy. I think that's the next evolution that we need to get used to, right? Bureaucracy is something we don't like, but it's part of the business world, as part of the professional world, right? And when a signature is missing on something, you have no idea how delayed your application gets if you forget to sign something. Whereas the international people, they already have this on lock because they're so used to it that their bids just get processed a lot faster, right? So yeah, that is something that made me stuck around is um is kind of getting used to that paperwork, right? You talk to a lot of people these days, nobody wants to do paperwork. It's nothing interesting about that, but that is something I think we need, and kind of talking to not only you guys, but a lot of young people in my circles. If there's one thing I want to give advice on as well, is to kind of get used to that. If there is a list of instructions, follow that to heart, because really and truly half the time that's what really gets your application through the door, right? I mean, yeah, it just comes, most of the times it boils down to those. You never follow one instruction, so your application gets put to the back, right? But yeah, yeah, hopefully that answered your question there.
Anyone has any last final comments or concerns, questions? What would you want to leave with our viewers today?
Um, I would want to leave the viewers knowing that archaeology is for everyone in Belize. It doesn't matter what your ethnic background or cultural background is, or even your age. I've had some people in their 60s and 70s on their knees at Calpeche digging, getting dirty, and even a little girl who was 7 years old. And she came, and her dad was like, "Are you sure she's not going to destroy anything?" I'm like, "No, because we will teach her not to destroy. We'll teach her the steps." And she came back every single year after that because she fell in love with it. If you have a passion for it, and if you think that is what you're meant to do, reach out to a project. Well, once COVID clears up and people start to dig again, you know, reach out, get the experience, so before you get to university, I want to do this or I don't want to. Because some people go to school, get all the theory, and get in the field and absolutely hate it. So my advice is find ways to reach out, find ways to engage yourself with public activities. Don't wait for them to come to you. Just reach out, send an email, and say, "Hi, I live in so and so, and I want the next time you come here for a lecture or you're doing an exhibit, I want to be a part of it, whether it's to help to set up, whether it's to give out flyers, whether it's with the IA or with IICR or the combination. If you have the passion, don't sit down and let it go by, because what we need in Belize, as Sylvia said, there's not a lot of people. We need more people to be passionate. And this is the generation right now that can change things. So in the future, we get a lot more people who are doing this job and a lot more Belizeans doing all the research in our country.
Yeah, I agree with Antonia. Leaving with a message. I think one thing that I've learned through my short period of living here on Earth is you just got to try. Really, you just expose yourself, right? As Marissa had noted, I did several things before I landed on something that I actually liked, right? So yeah, I support Antonio in his comment there. Just get your feet wet, see if it's something that you want to do, and if not, switch course and find something else, though.
I'd just like to leave with a bit of advice that we've sort of heard for persons that are in the anthropology program right now. But definitely focus on getting a well-rounded education while you're in school. Apart from just focusing on your core anthropology subjects, there's a lot of the skills that we've heard that are necessary to be successful in the field. So, writing, for example, is very much important. Communication is very much important. But apart from that, just also talk to people like us and others who have been working in the field. Because what I've seen is that after you come out from the anthropology program, it is very difficult to get people to understand the relevance of anthropology to other areas if you don't want to continue working in anthropology or you just need to get a job. That's something that still needs to change, but a part of that also could be addressed by learning how to market yourself, for example, and learning how to market anthropology as an area that's very far reaching and applicable to a lot of different areas of work. So that's my advice. Just try to get a well rounded education and also exposure to different areas in the field and outside of it.
And to wrap up, my advice would sort of be to everyone listening. There are many, many ways that you can be engaged and involved in sort of in anthropology and in archaeology, and by extension in telling, you know, the story of Belize through your perspective. I would say volunteer. I would say get engaged. I would say start a project. I would say visit an archaeological site, visit a museum. When you are there, take photos, be respectful when you are leaving the site and you see vendors in or around your areas, support local artisans, support local communities, and really engage in creating what is our Belizean heritage and our Belizean identity. People visit Belize because of our rich natural heritage, our cultural heritage, our environment, our living culture, and we have that at our fingertips. And now more than ever, we can experience it. And so I encourage and I challenge Belizeans. If you haven't engaged in any aspect, if you haven't listened to a Belizean artist, if you haven't sort of looked at an archaeological site or a natural heritage park, then do that. Like, now, do that today, do that tomorrow, and bring people along and encourage people. Join the Belize hiking group and go hiking. You know, there's so many things that you can do even in the middle of a pandemic that'll be so good for your mental health, that'll help a local business owner that needs your support. So engage in your culture and your heritage and your history, and be an active part in living that and writing that today.
Well, that wraps it up for today's live on Anthropology 101 with the Galen University Anthropology Club. We want to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who participated in today's live. So thank you to Ms. Palayo, Ms. Bate, Mr. Toll, Mr. Bardal. We appreciate you taking the time out to inform our interested audience about the possibilities when engaging in anthropological work. Similarly, we want to say thank you to our club members, Ethan Martinez, Rumari Ku, and Jessica Perez. Last but not least, we want to extend our sincerest gratitude to the Miss Sherry Gibbs, who is also the head of the department in the anthropology program here at Galen University. Thank you to all our viewers on Facebook and on YouTube for staying tuned in. Thank you for all the likes, shares, and comments. Also, do not forget that tomorrow the club will be back on Open Your Eyes morning show at 7:30 or 8 a.m. So stay tuned and take care.